All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome to one of the many videos that I'm producing on how to write and produce your very own stories. We're going to have a really fun conversation today because today is all about how to get an avid audience for your stories. We've got a couple great guests, which I'll introduce in a moment. And this is kind of like a writer's roundtable type of a deal. We want to have people who have a little bit different experiences than I have so that you get a wealth of information pertaining to how you might address the different topics we're going to talk about. Like I said, on today's show, we're specifically talking about finding an avid audience for your stories, people who are going to love your stories and promote your stories. So let me go ahead and introduce my first guest. My first guest has been a friend of mine for a few years now because we've been working on the same project together. She is a writer, a producer, a director, an actress, and a stand-up comedian. And she plays Mockingbird in our full cast audiobook, Death of a Bounty Hunter, which was co-written and co-produced by me. Anastasia Washington. I'm going to welcome Anastasia to the show. Anastasia, what is up?
Just staying inside.
Good for you. Good for you. It's exactly where we should all be, is staying inside. Unless you've got a protest to go to, then definitely go protest too. Like that's cool.
True. Then go outside with a mask.
That's right. Protect yourself. Can you tell the listeners and the viewers a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your career?
Sure. I am an actor. Well, you said a lot of the things that I do. And I've been acting and singing since I was a small child. And I've seen a lot of different versions of my career throughout the years because you got to roll with the punches. And now I'm always just producing a lot of content that speaks to my heart or my nerdiness and amplifies my voice during those lulls in the career, and also just to promote yourself. So that's kind of what I do. Yeah,
that's awesome. I appreciate you joining us on the show because I know that you have some of the writer-producer background, and that's really, I think, when you're talking about finding an audience, of course you find an audience as an actor. Of course you find an audience. We're going to talk about your stand-up a little bit more because you definitely have to find. I like the stand-up comedian's process, and we're getting into that more. But I want to hear about your perspective on that too. But in the meantime, let me actually welcome to the show. Now, I was going to have Victoria Hansen on the show. Victoria is a member of our Storytelling Brain Trust, which is the guiding force behind which stories that we release to the public, right? But unfortunately, Victoria couldn't make it today. But she referred us to someone that I assume she has lots of respect for because it's her husband, Grant. Grant Hansen is joining us today. He is an actor, producer, and writer and really likes to get into the whole storytelling process and oversee that. So let me welcome to the show, Grant Hansen. Welcome, Grant.
Hey, team. Thanks so much for having me. How are we doing today?
I think we're all doing pretty good. Have you been staying inside too? Have you been getting out a little bit? Like, what is the current status of the Hansen household?
We're up in the valley. It's triple digits today, so we're staying inside just to try to stay cool. But yeah, we've been living that indoor life, just been organizing and cleaning, get ready to get rid of some stuff. And
that's smart. That's smart. I will say the one good thing about staying inside and staying indoors is that it does allow you to invest some extra time. If you've got extra time, I feel like I don't even have any extra time, but if you've got extra time, you can actually watch or read or whatever, engage in storytelling in some way. So that's kind of cool too, that we can all catch up on some of our favorite stories. Could you give us a little bit of background with you, Grant, and what some of the projects that you've worked on and stuff?
Absolutely, man. Growing up, I was certain that I wanted to be a writer when I was a little kid. I'm like, I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to write books. I started writing books. I'm going to write novels. Then I was like, you know what? I think I want to be a speech writer. Like, I'd love to write speeches, and I'd love to kind of craft phrases and get those words out and communicate messages kind of in an oratory sense. And then I was like, oh man, I kind of like giving those speeches. So I decided to study communications in college. I added a performance theater major. So I kind of ran those two tracks, like public speaking and hosting and that idea, but then also kind of taking on a character and bringing to life stories through someone else's perspective on stage, kind of as an actor. So really enjoyed that. Been able to teach drama and acting over the years. I've spent a lot of time working in improv circles, which I think Anastasia might be able to relate to as well. I spent most of my time at the Groundlings. I've done years and years there at the Groundlings through their educational track and Right now, I'm open to wherever storytelling is happening. It's kind of where I'm at. I've been flexing the hosting muscle lately, which is great. This is kind of what we're doing right now. We're speaking to camera. We're talking about stories. We're having this conversation. But like you mentioned before, I really like storycraft from beginning to end. And while I know my strengths and my weaknesses there, as you sort of shepherd a story, I like to talk big picture, kind of break that story, big points, outline, that sort of thing. And then I know if you like improv, specificity is where the funny's at. So I love to get really nitty gritty on the back end as well, make things super specific, really punch up jokes. And I do like comedy. I like drama as well. I end up getting cast for a lot of dramatic stuff, which is interesting because I would consider myself kind of a cut up in real life. I don't know. You guys decide.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have my first question is not one of the questions that I've prepared for us to talk about in regards to finding an audience.
Whoa.
But rather, because of your improv background, I have to say, have you seen and do you like on Netflix the Schwartz and Middleditch show?
I have tried to get tickets to their live show several times. They sell out very quickly. Now, I know that I could just watch their live sets on Netflix. I've watched the trailer a couple times.
Yeah.
I have not watched it all the way through. Have you?
Have you, Anastasia?
I have not. I've been watching a lot of 1 hour comedy specials because I'm trying to make a 1 hour comedy special.
right.
So, I'm a little distracted from that and a lot of Black Lives Matter content. That is what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. Which is awesome, by the way. But I will say that the Schwartz and Middleditch show, I kind of held off for a little while. I put it in my watch list.
Okay.
I held off for a little bit. And then there's only 3 of them. And my wife and I watched them, and they are hilarious. If you even like remotely like improv, like I feel like you will love that show. So that's just recommendation for me.
I gotta watch. Now I have to.
You gotta watch. You gotta watch it. Okay, so let's get into the actual questions that I've got prepared. Again, we're talking about as a writer and a producer, one of the things that I feel like a lot of writers are not taught early on is that they spend a lot of time on craft. And there's nothing wrong with that. You should spend a lot of time on craft. But one of the things that I think happens to writers, it happened to me, is that we spend so much time on craft that you forget that your craft is going to be applied to an audience at some point in time. And when I was involved in the tech startup industry, you started from the ground floor going, I need customers tomorrow. And so therefore I'm building a product for my customers. And there's all these little techniques that they use to do that I've now brought into my writing career and found extremely helpful. So I want to try and get at like how we, the 3 of us, have in the past gone after this idea of finding an audience. So question for you, I'll start with you, Anastasia, on this one. When it comes to finding an audience, what part of the process should storytellers start to think about their audience? So, I know a lot of storytellers just jump into the story and just start writing because they're inspired. But really, at what point in the storytelling process should a writer or producer actually, start to think about like, where does my audience fit in here? What do you think about that?
I mean, I start thinking about it like second draft kind of as I'm going through, because at first I'm writing for me, right? Because I've been inspired by something. I'm producing something for me and I think it's interesting and I think it's, I would buy it, right? And then you start like looking over your project and you start thinking about the niches that you can fill and maybe where you can pump up that aspect of it. I love theme. I'm a big themer. I think it comes from like the times I did PR for a lot of stuff. So I love jumping on the theme bandwagon because I think it really shows your audience what you're gonna get, right? And it beats that like I'm gonna nerd out over this situation kind of thing. So I do find like trying to pump up those elements pretty early on. I mean, sometimes I'm not going to lie, when I'm writing the first draft, I think, well, that could be marketable, but for that, but Yeah, I'm pretty early on. I'm thinking about the audience, and maybe that's just because I'm a people pleaser.
Yeah, yeah. You said a couple things that I really like that I want to come back to in a second. But Grant, what about you? What part of the storytelling process are you generally tending to start to think about your audience?
I agree, and I think Anastasia hit a couple of really great points that you mentioned you want to address. I really like that second draft idea. I think that's kind of, there's some liberation there, because I feel like if you get too calculating and you don't let yourself dream at the onset, it can feel kind of clinical, or you can get into that area where you feel like you're kind of doing storytelling by committee. You're just trying to hit this group, that group. Yeah, like I don't think anyone gets really excited about like an idea and the first thing that comes to their mind is, let's make this a 4-quadrant idea. Like let's tell this story and we're going to hit every demographic. I do think that it can be helpful to just ask yourself near the beginning, like, who is this for?
Yeah.
Because our content is more niche than ever across multiple platforms. I mean, there's some very specific stuff out there. We know this. It's a buyer's market for content. I do think that it's helpful to frame pretty early and say, like who, all signs are pointing to this is my audience member. Who is this for? Do I have an idea? Don't get stuck on that. Don't get limited. But I think it's helpful to understand kind of based on your vertical or based on your genre or based on your perspective as a storyteller, who's going to be your bread and butter, like who's going to be there on opening day. And then work with that kind of foundationally. And like you said, you can take that idea and in drafts 2 and 3 and 4, and you can take it, plus it, minus it, make it more or less family friendly, more specific to genre nerds. Yeah, I think because not everything is for everyone.
Right.
And I think that's okay.
Right.
I think to piggyback off of what you were saying is like early on when I was a writer, I took everything really seriously, like every conflict or every time somebody like was like, oh, that's not my jam. I took it so personal and I wanted to adjust it to them and make it for them. And I think it was a few years ago when I was writing something about being biracial and being, in LA and being light skinned and all this. And half of my friends were like, well, this makes me feel really guilty. And the other half of my friends were like, this is awesome. I was like taking it so personally. And somebody said, know your audience. They're not the ones that are going to watch. It's fine. And it really, it changed things for me because not everyone's going to watch. I don't watch everything. So to expect everybody to watch your stuff is a little bit egotistical. I'm not even egotistical. Right. It's unrealistic. So right. I love that you were talking about that because I was just like, yeah, and also made me feel less hurt by things.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point. Like, if you start like in the commercial acting world, they say, just kind of throw that copy away. Be supernatural in a commercial audition. Just say it like you're saying it to your best friend. Picture the person that you're talking to. And when you can picture that person, it grounds the performance in reality. It makes it more natural. And I think that can be a helpful exercise for storytellers as well. Don't write your whole season or multiple season show for one person only. But if you can think of an audience member and try to make it real and honest, it really kind of grounds that in truth. And I think people can smell that a mile away. If it feels overwrought or if it feels written to hit the middle and then it hits no one. I do think understanding a person that might like it is helpful.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that there's two concepts I really want to pick up on because they're part of what I was taking away from my tech startup experience. And it was relative to something that each of you said. So Anastasia, you said your first audience is yourself. And I think that that's really important for writers, especially to get a grasp on and for producers to understand. And when I talk about writers and producers, usually I'm the same person. Like, right, I'm writing it and I'm producing it. But if you're going to work with a producer, I think you've got to understand that too, is that we take, we are, as a whole person, we are so involved in so many different aspects of life. It's why so many of us are so unique. And that's really great. It's a really awesome thing. And you're taking that uniqueness and you're saying, like, this is really important to me. And it's really important to me because of these various things I've got going on in my life and in my life experience. And then it's saying, so the first draft, I totally agree, is like for yourself. It's like, because in this tech startup world, that's what they would tell you, like, build the product for yourself. If you're the one with the problem that needs to be solved, then it's much easier for you to build something that meets that problem in a way that you enjoy. It delights you that it solves that problem for you. Otherwise, you're going into it going, that's a problem that I'm trying to solve, but it's not my problem. And so then you don't put the same amount of care into it, and you don't understand the same inputs and outputs that are occurring as you interact with the product itself. So I love that concept of saying, Anastasia, you said the first draft is for me, and then I start to look for the audience after that. And then you said something, Grant, that I think is really important, and that's that the other thing that they tell startup founders, and again, this is for people who are early on. So if you're a writer or producer and you're listening to this and like you already have several Netflix series going on, like, this is not necessarily advice for you. But the other thing too is that you are looking for a niche. You're not looking for the mass market. You're looking for a niche.
Right.
And I think it's really important that writers and producers acknowledge that early on. If you're big enough that you're going for the mass market, you have a completely different set of concerns. And it's not to say that your project won't break into the mass market at some point in time, but you are writing for a niche at first, for sure, in my opinion. So I just love that you guys both brought those things up. Any other thoughts about this before we move on to the next question?
I think we hit it all. I don't know.
Yeah, I have so many questions that are about this same thing. We'll be talking about it. Yeah. Grant, I'll start with you on this one.
Sure.
One of the things that I hear all the time, it's really more prevalent in the novel writing space, but I think it's kind of true in a lot of spaces now, is that writers should build a platform, right? Like, you should go out and build a platform. And whether it's like a literary concept or you can apply it to a screenwriting concept or whatever. My question is to both of you, but I'll start with Grant. How would you define a writer or a producer's platform? What is it? And is it something that's actually worth spending time on?
I'll be honest. I got a little brief, when you sent along maybe some of the things we'd be talking about, and you put writer's platform, and I was like, I think I kind of have an idea of what that might be.
Yeah.
But I looked it up. And I wanted to see, like, what are people saying that includes in 2020?
Right.
So, I mean, I'm looking here, like, there's a pie chart. There's a pie chart here. 25% expertise, 10% contacts, 10% social media, 10% previous media, 10% previous books, 10% personality, 10% existing readership, 15% ability to execute. Nice. So I think we've just solved it, guys. It's been decided.
Hey, if there's a pie chart, it is that is 100%
math.
Good to go. Yeah,
it's science.
It's right.
But I think it's helpful to sort of break it down and maybe tease out some of those elements. I don't know if I would ever put a percentage on it. But the one that stuck out to me was like a quarter of it, of this person's perspective on what a writer's platform is your expertise. And I do think that is very solid, because only you can tell the stories the way that you will tell them. Only you have your unique experiences and your unique vantage point, your perspective on the world, your experience set in the past that has led you to this place. It defines the way you interpret stories around you, the way you interact with people around you. You are an expert on you. You are, and that's a thing that they talk about in hosting and in acting. Like, I hate the idea of what is your brand, the branding, right? We're supposed to be branded. We're supposed to,
Right.
we are the product, and make sure that your fonts and your color choices and your social media all synergize and really help describe you as a brand. I think there's strength to that, but people are not products. You can't make that one-to-one comparison. It's helpful to build yourself, like the way that you want to tell stories, to find that niche, to find the area where you are an expert or you have something unique to say, and to really kind of pursue that. I think that's wise. I do think there is something to be said for levying the incredible influence that we can have on social media. I mean, the platforms are very often free. The cost is your sweat equity, right? The cost is the amount of time that it takes to build that brand, to find out. And I've been doing that with our company now for 4 years. At one point we were managing over 25 social media accounts.
Oh, wow.
And it was a lot across Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. And it's exhausting. But never before, I think, have so many people been able to share so many perspectives and so many ideas if they're willing to put the time in. And there's a way to work smarter, not harder, when it comes to those things. There's a way to find out like where your audience is, and maybe develop your platform there, develop your reach there, find out where the party is for your fans, your community, your group, and really focus on that. I don't have the answers for everything that a writer's platform includes.
Yeah.
But I do think the stories that you have told, it's good to be able to refer people to those, so that when they find something that you've done, you can say, oh, hey, check this out too. Like, this is kind of the foundation upon which I've built the story that you liked. That's good, man. I know when I discover a band or an album, I like to listen backwards. Yeah. I like to find out everything they've done, and like, then I understand that current work more. I'm like, oh man, this is such a deviation, or, oh wow, they really doubled down on this. So yeah, I think there's wisdom into assessing the stories, the media, previous media, and also really trying to focus in on like, what do I have to say? What do I have to say that's not already been said 1,000 times before? Or in improv, we talk about how there are only so many stories in the world, right? There's nothing new under the sun. There are so many stories that we can tell, but there are innumerable people and perspectives and characters that tell those stories, and the way they interact with those standard tropes or those standard storylines, those are innumerable. Like, the possibilities are endless.
I like that a lot. I'm going to pick up on a couple of those things. Anastasia, what do you think? What is this thing that we're calling a writers, producers platform, and what should it include? What should it be? What should it look like?
Well, I think it is a lot about branding yourself, right? And I'm not sure how much I understand it's important. It's a great way to be seen and stuff like that. But as a person that has been in the industry for a very long time and been branded myself multiple times in different ways, I find the best way for me since I've been doing this, I've found more headway is being my authentic self. And I think that sharing that authentic self in a variety of different platforms is ideal. Like, I think that is important. Social media, networking, all that stuff, but being authentically honest about who you are. And I went through this whole phase where I was like, oh, I'm gonna do all the fonts and then the color filter, and it's gonna just blow up and it's gonna be great. And I looked at my stuff and I was like, well, it maybe jumped up a couple of, my social media maybe jumped up a couple of bits, and then I just didn't really even recognize who this person was, and then I looked at the people that I admired, especially like some comedic voices that I really admire that, are doing the things that I want to do, and like this year and next year and whatever. And I noticed that they didn't care about that, but what they did care about was getting their voices out there in a variety of different ways. And I think that is the most important. That's your platform. Your platform is finding the ways that you can tell your vantage, your point of view from a variety of different ways. And it's so easy now to get your voice out there in so many different ways. And so many people are always like, hey, Susie, you're doing like stuff over here and over here and over here. It's too much. It's too much. And I'm like, yeah, but you listened. And so I don't know, just like get your voice out there. And if you don't dig something about a certain thing, then obviously that's not your vibe. I would just move away from it. I wouldn't try to shove it. Don't shove
right.
a square into a round hole just because you think,
oh man,
like I just feel like it just feels inauthentic, and this is not the time. Like maybe 10 years ago, everybody wanted to like be this, just like, I'm an actor and a writer and this is what we look like and what we act. That is not this time period. This is not the era we are in of content making. They want to know who you are and why you're making this content, and they want to be on that ride with you. So I feel like that's the most important. That was my first. You're welcome.
Are you familiar with, I mean, you guys spend much time on Reddit?
Yes, I still don't quite get Reddit, but I do. I'm on there.
I kind of love Reddit. But like you said, there's so many platforms. Like I absolutely missed the whole bandwagon for Snapchat. Like I never did Snap. I don't have a TikTok footprint yet, but there's a community on Reddit called Fellow Kids. It's a subreddit is the platform where it's an internet forum. They build themselves as the front page of the internet, and you can find specific communities that are like super amped about the most specific things. But this one is a pretty popular group called Fellow Kids. It's from 30 Rock, where Steve Buscemi tries to go undercover as a high schooler.
I love that.
Kind of like a 21 Jump Street situation.
Right.
And he like is so old and he like turns his cap around and he like greets these high schoolers in the hallway and he says, "Hello, fellow kids." And it's just so good. Like this entire internet community finds places where corporations try to like tweet a cool tweet, or people try to like express a business pitch or like a commercial thing or like any kind of big ask or like kind of a corporate presence in a social media group, and they just so miss the mark because it's just screams inauthentic. So sometimes when I'm making posts, I'm like, I just don't want to end up on that subreddit. Like, is this real, or am I trying to be a fellow kid?
I think that if you feel that way, then maybe, take a look at it. But I also think that we get really scared to be ourselves, right? And I feel like as creatives and as comedians, we are we have our moments of insecurity. And I think that a lot of times when we don't want to share our voice and we want to hide behind this generic, like this is what I'm supposed to look like on a platform, it really is just fear about sharing yourself and sharing your voice. And the truth is, you can't really be a great writer or a great storyteller or a great actor or whatever if you're not going to share the authenticity of yourself. And it's scary. Maybe don't tweet everything. I tweet a lot. I should probably not tweet a lot of stuff, but there were years where I was like, oh, well, that somebody's going to be mad at me. Well, yeah. Somebody will, but somebody's always going to be mad. I'm so sorry. And just being yourself is so much more freeing for your creative process. It's just so much better. It makes your voice less muffled, to be honest.
It's true. Like I said earlier, I feel like people can smell that a mile away. I think it is important to be fearless in being your authentic self, because only you can do that. Only you can do that. And so I do think being honest in those posts, regardless of the format, is the best way to go.
Yeah. Share it, cry after, and talk to your therapist, and then.
That's a good rule. Yeah. I would. So here's kind of my philosophy about this idea of a platform. I think that what is being sold to people, and it's the reference you had there, Grant, with the pie chart, is like almost proves my point because of how ridiculous it is. In my opinion, is that people who are advising writers and producers on how to get their name out there basically are like, look, if you build this thing, then they will come. And what you both said after that was, you both said, no, just be yourself, have a unique voice, and then start to develop that audience. And I think that, like, because people will gravitate towards what you're doing. And I think that's the proper way to look at it. Like, anybody who goes out and tells you like you need to have a platform, well, if you're talking to a beginner or even an intermediate writer, chances are they probably don't need a platform, because chances are they probably don't have much of an audience yet. And for me, I would say concentrate on building your audience, and then your audience is going to go, where do I go to find more of your stuff? And like, how do I get to know more about you? And then build the platform. But they're going to figure out that second part, because you're going to give them stories that they love. And when you give them the stories they love, Grant, like, just like you said, Grant, they're going to go, I want to know more about you. What other stories have you done? What other perspectives do you have? And then you can build a platform. But to think that you would build the platform first, to me, is like, no, build your audience first, because you can get all wrapped up in this platform building. And the reality is there's no audience for that platform. And then now you've got to go back and rebuild the audience, and then go back and probably rebuild the platform, because you'll realize you didn't really build it the way you had intended to build it. And so to me, I'm always more of a person that's like, look, concentrate on your stories, concentrate on finding an audience that loves what you do. And that's, to me, is much more similar to the Pixar model. Like, if you look at some of the big production companies that were like actually legit tech startups, and you combine the two of like, how did they go about doing what they were doing? For a while, they would say Pixar is releasing a movie, but if you went to Pixar's website back in the day, it would just be whatever their latest project was. It wasn't like, hey, here's a bunch of Pixar information. It was, we're going to become known for reaching an audience that knows us, that knows what to expect when they go to a movie theater and experience one of our stories. And we're building that particular audience. And of course, then we'll have a website where you can go find all the rest of the stories that we do. But I think a lot of people get it backwards, because it's almost kind of like, I think this is the mentality, is that as a writer, a lot of people think you're not going to produce your own stuff. So therefore, you should try and have a platform, because then producers will see you have a platform, and then they'll pay you to write stuff for them. And it's like, okay, producers are more likely to work with you anyways if you have an audience, and they're not going to care so much about this platform idea. Build that later when you have people demanding it. But first and foremost, build your audience. So that's kind of my take on that.
And build your content. Just make stuff. Like, That's the thing. You have to start making stuff. And to be honest, you're saying like, either people are like, I'm not going to produce it. You will produce it. The first few things that you do, you are going to be producing it. So I would focus more on getting through the first few bumps and errors of going through your first few productions, and just doing that. Make the content, and don't make an excuse. Well, I have to wait until I make the website, and I have to make, and like, just do it. Just make it.
Exactly. That's a great way to clarify that. I love it. Okay, so Anastasia, I'll start with you on this one. How would you define your audience today? Who are you writing for? Are you writing primarily for studios, publishers, production companies, or are you writing for a specific niche? And what, if you can, describe some of the needs and wants of the audience that you're trying to reach? And then I have lots of questions for you. All of those, plus I had a question come through from somebody on Facebook, from Kim Cordell, from the Storytelling Community Facebook group, who said, also, why are strangers more interested in our storytelling than friends and family are? So what are all those things? Who are you writing for? What are their needs and wants? And how come our friends and family aren't as into our stories as strangers are?
I mean, we can go into like demographics of like what my highest demographic is, right? But like, that's boring. But I am writing a variety of different genres right now. So I write for those who want to laugh and that aren't afraid of a diverse voice. So mainly minorities and those that are liberally like listening as my audience for a lot of my comedy, because I talk about the experience of being a woman of color, and I make it funny, I hope. And so that's kind of like my comedic voice. That's my comedic audience, right? And so But then also I do content about like horror movies and true crime, and that is largely female. And across the board, you know, because we love it. We love blood, guts, and crime. We love it. So that's definitely one of my audiences, or one of the people that I keep in mind when I'm writing stuff is definitely women. And also, I mean, when you think about it, that all aligns with who I am. I'm looking for the audience that is me. Right? I am making stuff that I would want to consume, and just taking my own spin on it, because that's the kind of stuff I'm interested in, and that's the stuff I'm passionate about. And I think when you're passionate about something, that is shown in your work. What was the other question that I was supposed to ask?
There was the question as to why strangers are more interested in our works than our friends and family often are.
You know, family dynamics are interesting. You know,
True.
I'm not going to comment on why your family specifically doesn't want to listen, but I know my family has heard my stories 1,000 times, right? And they probably have been there at the time, and it doesn't stop me from saying them. But you know, you have to understand your family knows you, right? And they know like probably how you'd react in a situation like that, right? Whereas a person that's a stranger, they don't know. They're on the edge of the seat. They're like, what? You're gonna react like how? You know, like like, oh, okay. You know, they're along for the ride because they don't know you like that, right? They don't know. Whereas my sister or my mom will know that I'm going to do this, or was probably there when I did this. So, you know, it's just, that's my opinion of it. Also, you know, maybe they just, you know, aren't into the subject you're talking about. Change subjects. Or just running around in a circle. That's what I do when my family is like boring. Circle tap dance.
I like that. Always be entertaining.
Exactly.
Yeah. What about you, Grant? What are some of the what audience are you trying to reach? What are some of their needs and wants? And then what's this deal with family versus strangers?
I wanna go backwards. I think I don't know if there's a corollary between this, but man, I see a lot of creators in my social media circles post saying, and shouldn't friends and family be among the first to say, hey, you did a startup, or you just started a business. Let me patronize you with real money. And sometimes, this hasn't been my experience, but sometimes I feel like the minute people hear that you're doing something new, they think they've got the hookup. And they're like, so when do I get a free copy? Or in what way can you get, like, what's my discount? And like, what? No, I think maybe I need you. Like, I need that grassroots support to be like, hey, is there any way that we can like support you and then some? I don't know if there's a corollary there, but it did make me think about that. I do think there is something to be said for people hearing your stories before. I know my family is a family of storytellers, and we tell the same stories over and over again. And it's like, Jerry Seinfeld has a classic bit, I think, about people who've been dating each other for a while. You know, it's like two magicians. You know, you've seen all their tricks. You've seen their act. And it's like, hey, here's a hat. Oh, what? You got a rabbit in there? And like, I believe this is your card. Like, there's not a whole lot of surprising that sometimes you can do. And it's fun to be able to surprise and delight people with your storytelling sensibility, or with your perspective, or with that one idea that you've been like building and talking about for years with the people, you know, boots on the ground in your life. And then sometimes your storytelling sensibility is so specific, or you found a niche that's so specific, it doesn't include your friends and family. And our friends and family have been very supportive of the stories that we started to tell a couple of years ago. Victoria, our writing partner, Josh, and myself, we got to the point where we said, like you did, or like you were understanding, we just want to start making something. Let's make something. And we jumped into a very specific area. It's a corner of the internet that's been very popular for the last decade, off and on, a little bit more early, not so much now, called literary inspired web series.
Mm.
So one thing that's easy to do for us, we were inspired by a couple people that did what we're doing right here, making a kind of interaction where you speak directly to camera.
Mm.
Some people call it vlog style, a vlog style story. They've been very popular during this safer at home quarantine period,
right.
because they're eminently producible.
Mm.
And in the LI, it's called LIW, Literary Inspired Web Series. In that community, the fans can be very specific. They can be diverse, but they can also have very specific interests. And I say that because often people are finding works that are in the public domain and they are adapting them. They're producing them because they are producible and because you don't have to pay for the rights.
Right.
So we started with a project a couple of years ago based on a book written in 1911, Indiana. It was called The House of a Thousand Candles.
Oh, wow.
And that was a great way to start. People didn't understand that it was an adaptation because no one had heard of that book, which was an interesting thing. We weren't pursuing the LIW community as fervently as we could have, but partway through, people said, I think this is an adaptation. And we said, it is. It is. Here's the book. And then for our second chapter, that first one was like 29 chapters. It was like 120 pages. It was really scant. And we decided to make a season 2 out of one of the most famous books in the English language. It's called The Moonstone. It was written by one of Charles Dickens' contemporaries, Wilkie Collins. And it's a much bigger ask because this book is like 500 pages. So if you wanted to join our story, we were asking you to, a lot of people that wanted to be a part of this specific area of the internet, they love to read. They like romance. They like comedy. They like the intersection of those. So that's where we lived. Romance, comedy, adaptations of classic works. And then we added a layer on top of that. We tried to make our storytelling interactive. I don't know if you're familiar with transmedia storytelling. It's where you take as many platforms as possible and you tell the story on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. Some elements in real time, some elements are interactive. So we had those. That's why we had 25 social media accounts, because our characters had socials that Victoria and myself were operating. So we would shoot out our actors, get the whole series in the can, and then as it unspooled, the stories that we were telling, they should feel like real-time video entries, like a diary. And then because of that interactivity, some people call it gamifying, we were able to create puzzles that the audience, the fan community, would solve in real time with the characters on Twitter. I'm exhausted just explaining it to you because it's so specific. It is so incredibly specific. And I've had a chance to be able to like pitch these stories for a while, and it's a big ask. It's a very specific person that's going to follow a story unspooling in real time on Twitter and interact with other people on Twitter around the world to solve puzzles and to get behind relationships that are often will they, won't they, throughout across. In our case, it was across 100 episodes. So it's the nichest niche.
Yeah.
That goes to say that our audience, we knew that our audience was literate. We knew they were primarily female. We knew that they were watching things. It's things as specific as we knew they were watching things while at home with kids, young kids. We knew that the worlds that we were creating online were almost like soap operas into which our audience is able to involve themselves and get lost in the story, because to her credit, man, Victoria really spearheaded that Twitter effort at tens of thousands of tweets as a cast of characters.
Wow.
So that's what we knew about. That's what we knew about our people. And we've started very niche and now we're looking to expand.
Yeah. Okay, so you guys have both said things that are, again, really, really critical, I think, to understanding how the process works and how you would go about these ideas. One of the things that so just a little bit of background on me. I've always been a writer since I was very, very, very young, but I specifically went into the business world and into marketing so that I could understand how to promote my works. But it wasn't until I did the tech startup that I understood something very critical that most people do not realize about audiences. or customers, depending on what you're dealing with. And that is that the process of finding your early customers is far more difficult than you imagine it to be. Because so this is a common experience, right? A common experience is that a tech startup founder will go and do a customer interview. They'll come up with an assumption about what the problem that they're going to address with their product is. And that they'll assume that these people have this problem, so therefore they will want what I'm building for them. And there's a process by which you go through this interview process to understand what their needs and wants are, so that you can kind of determine whether or not they're in your marketplace and they're going to support you. And I think a lot of writers do not do this. Now, you guys have already showcased that you, to a certain extent, already do this process, which is fantastic. But you actually go and you start to learn the person who I thought would love this doesn't love it. And the whole point is that this is one of my favorite tricks. It used to be one of my favorite tricks as a tech startup founder. I'd go, let me tell you what the problem is, and then ask you if you resonate with it. I would tell them the problem that we were trying to solve. They would then say, oh yeah, I really resonate with that. And then I would ask a question that would flip everything on its head. I would say, can you repeat that problem back to me, but using your own words? Inevitably, what they would repeat back to me was nothing like what I had expressed to them in the first place. And so what you get is we have these inherent biases. One of our inherent biases is that when someone asks us a question to help them out with something, we really want to be helpful. Very few people are going to be that are your friends or are connected to you in some way are going to be like, yeah, I'm just going to give you some made up answer because I'd rather be a jerk. Like, that's not usually the case. If it's a complete stranger or something on Twitter, then maybe, but in person, that's very rare. So what they say is, oh, I really resonate with that. But then when you start to break it down, you start to realize, oh, I'm building a product that doesn't actually meet their need at all, because they see the problem very differently than I see the problem. And therefore, so like Anastasia, as you talked about, you're creating what you're creating for you, and you're trying to find more use. But a lot of times what you'll find is, oh, these people aren't like me at all. Like, I thought they were like me, and they're just not like me. And so this is why I love, Grant, your concept of saying a niche of a niche of a niche, right? Like, because then you really drill down into, this is what these people want. This is what they love. And I'm going to provide this thing that they love to them. And I love that approach. And I think that when it comes to this question of saying, why do our friends and family oftentimes not react to our work the way that strangers do? It's because of those things, especially because we assume that our friends and family, because they are more like us, demographically speaking, that's also going to work their way into their psychographics, right? But all you have to do is sit around a Thanksgiving table for a little while and realize, like, whoa, we're all really different. Despite the fact that we have some of the same genetic makeup, we have a very different perspectives on the way that life is. We have very different interests. And I think what you can find is like, okay, well, because I've had the same experiences as other members of my family or other friends I have, then by definition, they will like what I'm doing. And the reality is that that's not usually true. And if you were to interview them in that kind of process and ask them, they would have told you up front, like, oh yeah, I mean, that's not really what I resonate with. Or even when you're creating that kind of thing, I'm into Westerns, but when you create that kind of Western, like, that's not really my jam. And then you would know automatically, like, they're not in my audience for this particular story that I'm trying to put out there. And so I think it's actually really worthwhile to do what you guys are doing, niche way down, and then understand who it is you're actually trying to reach. And then don't assume that everybody that you think is going to be in that audience is going to be in that audience, because oftentimes that is not the case.
It's something that we always talk about in comedy. It's know your audience. And I always say it in, like, when I'm playing Cards Against Humanity or something, when people are like, I'd be like, why'd you give me this card? Know your audience. Like, you know, and that's your friend group, you know, like, that's your family. Yeah. And I love my family, but we have very different ways of going through life. And I think finding a niche is a great place to hide. I love a niche program more. Like, if you look at my podcast, right? I have podcasts about being nerdy. Okay, that's so general, and it's so fun, and it's a great group of people, and we have fun. But the ones that I really know, and the ones I'm really passionate about, and the ones that people show up for and are really excited about, are when I say, hey, I do one called Serial Killer. we pair breakfast cereal and true crime. People know what they're getting. They know what they're getting into. And that is, it's either your thing or it's not, you know, and it's not, and don't take that personally either, because, you know, like, I think sometimes we bring our stuff to our friends and our family and we feel really hurt when they don't resonate it with it. And, you know, my experiences in life, I go through with comedy, but some people don't. And some people, some of the stuff I explore are dark things, but I make them comedic, right? And then to them, that's like, ooh, that's not funny because I know it's you, or I know I feel that, you know, like there's some feelings behind it that they can't find funny, and so, or I had to become okay with that and be like, not my audience.
That's really good. In fact, there's two things that are really helpful in there. One of them is, like you said, like, just that's not my audience, so I don't have to assume that they're going to like it. That's fantastic. The other thing that I think is really helpful to do too, that I've noticed, is even with your audience. So we had a meeting with our storytelling brain trust, which Victoria is a part of. And I was presenting a story to them as a short film that we want to produce. Well, we were going to produce it later this year, but with COVID, who knows? And after they gave me all the feedback, the different members of this storytelling brain trust group gave me all their feedback. One of the people said, like, hey, thanks for being willing to take all that feedback in, and, like, you know, because it can be hard to hear feedback. And one of the things that I realize is that when you're writing and producing your own content, it is so much easier to get feedback, because when you can instantly take off your writer hat for a minute and go, if this is going to reach people and it's going to be the best possible thing that it's going to be, it's much easier for me to put my producer hat on and be like, okay, tell me what's wrong with it, because I want it to be the best, right? Like, and so if you can do that too, it's just a little bit of a trick, a little bit of a mindset shift that will make it much easier to deal with. One quick thing before I transition, because one of the things that I didn't mention was what audiences I'm writing for right now. Yeah. And to Grant's perspective, we actually, or to your point, I should say, we actually niched way down with our Death of a Bounty Hunter work. Mm-hmm. So our Death of a Bounty Hunter work started out as just sort of more like a supernatural Western, but very just Western, because it was a short film. Like, this is back in 2012. And then by the time that we brought Anastasia on board, like, it had gone full, like, Tarantino-esque, steampunk. Like, we were just narrowing it down, like, because we thought to ourselves, we need to capitalize on a smaller segment of the market, because who we're competing with now, like, to just think about it this way. If you're thinking about it from a producer's standpoint, from the minute you start creating, you're thinking in your head, like, how would someone find this on Google? And who are my competitors if they type something into the search bar? And if you think that way, you're thinking, like, well, I need to be a niche of a niche of a niche, because if you write in anything to do with time travel, which one of our stories is a time travel book, then there's no way that our story's coming up. Not for years. Not when you have, like, Stephen King writing time travel, right? Or Blake Crouch writing time travel. Yeah, exactly. And so
I swear to God, that man.
yeah, I know. And so with Death of a Bounty Hunter, we specifically niched way down because of, like you're saying, Grant, like, you got to be able to find that audience, and if you niche way down, it's just way easier. So, good, really, really good stuff. Thank you.
I wanted to say to Anastasia's content that she was speaking about, I love a good crossover. Serial killer sounds amazing. Yes. So cheers to that. I love breakfast cereal, and we've been on a true crime kick. So match made in heaven.
Match made in heaven.
And to your point, Jay and Anastasia, about how, like, when you start getting to that point where you're like, I don't want someone else to open the door for me, because I've just been knocking at all these doors. I need to start making my own door. I'm going to start making my own things. And you do start wearing those multiple hats. I don't know about you, but it has opened my eyes and given me so much more grace for other creators. Before, I would love to get into that, like, post-movie, like, breakdown. I wasn't malicious, but I would like to, and I still do, like to analyze, and I like to get into the nitty-gritty, and I like to say, well, this worked and this doesn't. And a lot of people, I think, run the risk of being hypercritical, and not in a way that really is helpful or conducive to a positive storytelling experience and a dialogue. They don't get me wrong. Some things are empirically more artful than others. Some
Right.
some things are more effective. Some stories are more beautifully told. Some stories are, you could say this is a classic, or we can all agree like this thing is really well done. But we've let go of this idea as we started to make things. I know that I have, at least. Instead of saying, man, that sucked, or that movie was so bad, I say, that wasn't for me.
Exactly.
That movie is for someone. It was made for someone.
Right.
It might not be the greatest quality in terms of like what we can agree upon as artists and storytellers, but it has an audience.
Yeah.
Some people sit down and they will put that on and they will watch it again and again and again, and they love it. And that's good because that project has that audience and they found each other. I don't want my comments ever to be tearing down another creative, because I've seen how much it takes to make something and actually follow through.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really good. That's really good.
Nice that you wear multiple hats. You start seeing why things happen, right? Like when you're watching something and you're like, oh, I didn't like that, but they probably had to do it because ... You start becoming very aware of why things happen, right? And I also love that you're building up other creators while not always liking it. Because I had this whole thing with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, right? Anybody else? I said, yes, it was beautiful. Everyone was a great actor. It was a great production. I don't like it. And people would be like, well, blah, 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 blah. You have to like it. And I'm like, no, I don't actually have to like it.
Not for me.
Not for me. But I can say the production value, amazing. The acting, amazing. I don't like it.
Right. Well, not only that, but I think you can also identify like,
hey, I'm not the audience.
Exactly. And you can be okay saying things like, I know that this movie is a pile of shit, but I still love it. Like it still speaks to me personally, right? Like I
say it all the time. I'm like, this movie is crap, this TV show is crap. I can't get enough. I want to watch it over and over again.
Exactly.
It's fine.
Exactly.
Some things just don't speak to us, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I take things so personally too. I get it. Like everyone gets like very not rageful. They geek out over stuff so much now. Like our culture is so like invested. So we either like take it like so to heart that this person doesn't like it or that this person likes it, and we have to stop because it really puts like a big divide between us. And I am very guilty of that.
Yeah.
But
I know. It can be. I like that perspective that both of you are sharing, that essentially at the end of the day, like, I think this is better too when you've been looking for an audience and you realize that the audience is what's important about this equation. Then you don't have to criticize things as much. You can just self-select out of it. I mean, I think you mentioned it earlier, Grant, like there's so many options for people in today's world that it's unbelievable almost, because once we started fracturing our content up into cable channels, then cable channels became streaming channels, and then streaming channels became YouTube and all the other TikTok and every other possible thing you can imagine. We can choose whatever we want. Yeah, exactly.
With Quibi, I'm just kidding.
well, who knows, right? But it's one of those things where it's like you just choose what you want and go like what you want. You don't have to criticize anything else or even think about it. Don't worry about it.
Great.
We've got 3 more questions, but I'm going to combine these next 2 questions because they're very similar to one another. So Grant, I'll start with you on this one. So I just want to know, of all the things that you've done throughout your career in writing and producing, what has been the one activity that has had the biggest impact on building the audience you currently have? And then if you were able to say for somebody else who's looking to do this writing and producing their own content thing, what are some specific tangible things that they should start doing? What do you think, Grant?
That's a great question, man. I mentioned it earlier. We kind of jammed on our first project for a long time. Like we worked on those scripts so much. And then we made the difficult decision to say, we don't know if we can do right by the amount of time we've invested in this story. Because it was tied into the actual calendar and a real-time release, we made the difficult call to say, all the scripts aren't done. They're not all ready. We don't have enough time to do pre-production. We're going to push a full calendar year. And that was tough because we'd already been working on it for a while. But that year allowed us to do so much pre-production, to polish those scripts, to get them to the point where they just, in our opinion, you know, they just sung, because we had, oh man, we got into the word choice, adjectives, you know, the right flavor here and there. And a lot of that being focused on the story, being story forward, was really helpful because of the limitations of this genre. I mean, you're asking people to sit down and watch someone speak directly to camera. So the things that they're saying, you want them to be really great. You want them to be funny. You want them to be polished and thoughtful. You also want them to be real and natural, because it's supposed to be like a video diary. So we worked hard on that. We found an audience of people that really liked that. We were able to connect with the community of LIW fans with that first one, even working with people who had been in previous LIW productions, kind of cross-pollinating. Because sometimes you can find an actor who has a fan group, and they come and they want to see more of what that actor is doing, or what that director or producer is doing. I say all that to say the first one we were super proud of, because it took a lot of time and energy. And then right when we wrapped season 1, we didn't call it season 1. We said, so what's next? And we jumped right back into, we said, we went back and we found a handful of books that we wanted to do. And then Victoria found several texts. She's got an English major background, and we were able to find this text. And we thought, well, maybe we can tell another story. But the more that we looked at it, these characters, it started to match up to the first story we told in such an incredibly intriguing way, kind of eerie, compelling. Like, this character could be this character, and this character could be this character. And before we knew it, we were taking a book written in another country 60 years before, and we were making it a sequel to our first adaptation. So this book became season 2. And the way that kind of worked together, it was just serendipity, and it was beautiful and harmonious. But we rolled everything that we learned from season 1. By the way, our team is called Screen 14 Pictures. Screen 14 Pictures. We're named after the theater, screen number 14 over at the AMC 16 in Burbank, because that's where we love to see movies on opening night. It's one of our favorite spots. So we named it after Screen 14 over there. When we got to season 2, we had all of these things that we'd learned from season 1. We had jammed on those scripts for so long that at that point we knew how to break the story. We knew break the adaptation. It's a little bit different when the foundation is there. You're trying to modernize it. You're trying to bring a story written in 1840s into 2019, 2018. I was really proud of the way that we were able to find the fans from season 1. And we did a kind of a shift. We went to VidCon for YouTube creators before the Moonstone came out, which is kind of our season 2. And we did learn some really helpful things there about how to invest in, like, what's the point in telling stories, right? Like, we want to know and be known. That's kind of the cry of every human heart. Like, I want to be able to express myself, and I want someone else to say, yes. Like, yes, I appreciate that story that you told. I understand, I recognize, I empathize, I synergize, like all of those things. So we were able to take what we learned from VidCon and kind of like double down on that community that had sprung up around season 1 and say, what if they're not fans? What if this is a community? They're not fans. This is a family. So we created a community group into which people could invest. Like, it's kind of like, a good many YouTubers, they create a name for the people that are following that content. The fans become community, they become family, and they start to identify, and then they start to propagate that brand or that storytelling sensibility for you. So the people that like our stuff, we were able to welcome them into the screener community because they like Screen 14. They start calling themselves screeners. And the people that were able and really excited about that interactive story puzzle element, or kind of an ARG, alternate reality game, if you want to get super nerdy, the people that were like there for that, like, we welcomed them back and we said, wow, that really went well in season 1. Let's make it even deeper and richer in season 2. And so we welcomed them, and we actually wrote them into the story, and we started calling them the hashtag collective detective. And so it was so fun to see people in Canada and Germany and France and India. Like our group, our screeners are small, but they are mighty. They have like a text thread that we're able to be a part of, like a group thread on Facebook, and they're like really good friends, and it's so delightful to see. Yeah, like they're like there for each other, and to have the kind of story that we were able to like tell, and you start posting things, and you're like, is this just going into the void? Like, is anyone going to hear this? Right. And to see the audience, to see your story find an audience, and to start making things together, because we were doing it in real time. Their influence in the story was shaping the direction of the narrative online, and then even in some things that we held back to shoot later based on their involvement. I'm super proud of it. Just like really, really proud of the way that we've created a community together. Last thing, in quarantine here, we actually tried a storytelling experiment that we called a screenshot, where we got online in a live format like this with this dedicated group of screeners, and we said, we want to do a story, and we want you to adapt it with us right now in real time. Oh, cool. So they ended up wanting to see. We gave them some options, gave them some things to choose from, kind of like a choose your own. Let's start with a foundation, and they wanted to see the Three Little Pigs adapted, told as a 90s style sitcom. It was like an improv set, really, what we were doing.
Yeah.
And then they wanted to add a dragon character, and they wanted a redemption arc for the wolf.
Oh, nice.
We got a list of props. We got a bunch of stuff, and we treated it kind of like a 48-hour film festival. It ended up taking a couple weeks, and then we like pulled Twitter for the fans, the screener community to say, do you want this or this or this? And we made something together while we were all kind of stuck in our apartments. And it was really lovely to be a part of that co-creation with the community that has given so much to us over the years.
That's awesome. So if you were giving advice to somebody else, it's find your fans and build and continue to invest in them.
Yeah. I mean, I know these people's names, like we've connected in such a personal way, and that's not always possible at scale. Mm. But here, kind of at the beginning of our journey, or like maybe 2 projects deep, I know that these people are just incredible fans and champions, and we want to make things that they really enjoy. And to know them at that specific level is to be able to tell stories, or to know as we deviate, some people might like this more than others. I know so-and-so is not going to be a fan, and that's okay.
Yeah. That's awesome. What about you, Anastasia? What are some of the things that you've specifically done to build your audience? And then what would you recommend that other writer, producer folks do to build their audience as well?
Well, I think one of the main things that I started doing early on was being a little fearless with my asking. Mm. I found out where my audience was going to be, right? So a lot of my content early on was a lot about, just nerd genre based stuff. So sorry that my dog just barked in the background.
No worries.
It was a lot about nerd genre stuff. And I remember early on just going, I wonder if we could just ask Comic-Con if we could have have a panel. And my friends were like, what? And I was like, yeah, I just wonder, how do people get panels? And so I researched it. I found out contacts. We started out at small conventions, and we moved to bigger conventions because the smaller conventions gave us clout, because we could say, oh yeah, we've done it. We've been at this convention and whatever. And I think finding your audience and finding where they're at and finding out how to get there and how to be there, and especially finding free ways to be there, because your content is going to cost enough money and publicity is costing enough money, but finding great ways to connect with your audience at the places that they're going to be at, right? So if it's like you're doing Renaissance stuff, how can you get involved in Ren Fair? Like how can you get involved in these communities, because that's where your audience is, right? And not being afraid to ask. And honestly, most people don't want to say no, and I'm not saying that like in a guilty way. I'm just saying like most people don't get asked these questions, right? Like when you're afraid that you can't get this actor for this project, ask. And maybe they can't do it, but maybe they know someone that can, like it's as long as you come from respect and love and caring about this project and just you're passionate about it and you're respectful, be respectful. I think that the biggest thing that helped me connect to my audience was the fact that I just was like, why not ask? Why not ask, Yeah. And we got some really good stuff right off the bat just by being kind, nice, respectful, and asking. And no, sometimes we did hear, of course we heard no a couple times. But eventually, they turned to yeses. As you kept respectfully updating people about the content and where your project was going. So I would say that was one of the biggest things that I kind of, I don't know why I was in that mind space, because I'm a very like, don't bother people, but for some reason I found this way of being like writing really nice letters and emails and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, as for starting, can my dog? I'm so sorry.
No, my studio dog is right here, and he's just crashed out. But at any moment, he could do the exact same thing. Yeah, who knows?
Tough to say. As for starting your stuff, I mean, like that's such a like it's so different depending on what kind of project you're doing, right? I can say that it's never been easier to make content. There's so many ways to get your content out there, and there's so many reasonable ways. So just do it. I would say, like, don't hold yourself back. I read a really good book a couple of years ago called Big Magic, which is really about the fear of getting your content out there, fear of getting your voice out there. And it really was like, at a certain point, yes, get the things in a row, make sure you have all the elements, but at a certain point, you just gotta let it go and let it out there. So don't hold yourself back because you're not perfect or ready. Check what ready means, right? If ready means I don't have anything on tape, get something on tape, right? But like, right. If I have something on tape and it's pretty good, get it out there and then start doing, like, your next project's going to get better and better and better. It's a learning curve. Like, everyone starts somewhere. So yeah, I mean, I would just say it depends on your project. Get yourself a mic, get yourself like cheap lighting on Amazon. You can do most stuff from your iPhone or your Android now. It's insane. And there's a lot of reasonable, if not free, ways to get your podcast, your web series out there. So it should never be a funding thing at first, and it should never be a fear thing at first, because you just have to do it, as Nike would say.
I love that. I love all of that advice. In fact, I would double down in a couple ways on some of that, because I would say that one of the biggest things in my writing and producing career that has pushed it forward considerably is that I come from a prose writing background predominantly, and that is a very lonely process. But even with my time travel novel, I went out and asked a friend of mine to be a part of it and help me with the story. And then when we did Death of a Bounty Hunter, we had already done a film, a Star Wars fan film, Star Wars Rivals. It's on YouTube. You can watch it anytime. We did that film, and what I learned doing that film was that the collaborative process, from the writer-producer standpoint, the collaborative process adds things that will just kick your writing into the next gear, right? It kicks it into the next level. And so the aspect of collaboration became really important, to the point where when we went to do Death of a Bounty Hunter, we realized that it was more of a feature and there was no way to do it without paying $100 million. And we said, but we have all these actor friends now, and they want to work on stuff, and we want to work with them on stuff and collaborate with them on stuff. And so just being able to bring people into that process, and all of a sudden it becomes, there's nothing like being a writer and a producer and handing your work off to someone who's going to perform it, and then watching them perform it and go, that's better than I thought it was, because they added something to it that I wasn't thinking. And now what it became is fantastic, right? Like that process is just really an amazing process. And so I would say, if you're on the writer producer side of things and you want to produce something, collaborate as much as possible with people who share your vision, of course, and who understand what you're trying to accomplish. And then the other thing I would say is, like, yeah, then find that audience, spend the time figuring out who your audience is and ask them questions. How did you react to this scene? What made you react this way? What emotions did you feel? Why did you feel those emotions? And you will learn so much about, this is what I think, people study craft by going to someone who's more experienced than them and asking them questions about craft. But guess the other way you can better your craft is ask your audience what they thought of it when you finished it, and they'll give you this really, really amazing feedback. So I love all of what you guys said, and just, keep collaborating with people and keep inviting people into your process. I just have one more question for you guys. And technically this question was specifically geared for Anastasia, but because you have a little bit of a background in improv, Grant, you might actually be able to weigh in on this as well. So I'll ask Anastasia to start with. But I mentioned that I've been a tech startup founder, and I found that testing and learning, like I've talked about, was such a good way of finding your avid audience. And you had to have something to test with them. So you had to come up with something, test it with them, take it back, try and iterate on it. And I listened to a lot of Joe Rogan, and I listened to a lot of Joe Rogan talking to other comedians, and they almost all have something that is very much similar in their process, which is to say that they seem to go out and test material with an audience and then start to adapt and tweak it so that when they come back to the audience, they can see if they've improved on it and it's gotten funnier. So I just wondered, can you walk us through a little bit of your process with stand-up, and then give us any thoughts about how that process with stand-up could also work in the context of writing and producing other forms of stories?
Well, for me, I think comedy writers and stand-ups, a lot of times we're always kind of working. And what I mean is, like, when we're walking around and we hear you laugh at something we said, even if it was, we kind of take note, right? So we take note that there's interest, that there's a reaction. And so usually I'll write it down on my phone, even if it's silly, even if it's like a half idea, but somebody responded, right? And so then I work it into, like, what I can think of as a joke, right? And then I usually, I really have a good group of stand-up comedian friends that we usually go, is this funny? Like, like we just run each other's sets by each other, and it's really supportive and amazing. And sometimes they're like, yeah, that don't read. But honestly, it doesn't matter, because once you get on stage, each audience is so different, and you've got to try to read the room, right? So you have this, like, arsenal of different things that read funny and don't read funny in certain places, and you just have to constantly adapt and not take it personally, and almost have like a temperature gauge joke, right? You look at the audience, you might be able to, like, kind of figure out what kind of people they are, but that's a judgment, right? We don't 100% know. You say a joke, you feel the room, you go, yep, I can double down on this kind of stuff, or I need to back off this stuff, right? And I think that it does translate into all kinds of work, right? Because all of us creative people are coming up with ideas all the time, right? So we're hearing what people are reacting to. We're hearing what people are passionate about. We're seeing what's on the news. We're seeing what's on our TV. We're seeing what people are just gabbing about at a party. And we're getting inspired all the time by different things. And we're getting people's reactions and we're noting it. And so I think that's something that you do in comedy that can go into any area of creative like endeavors, because it's just being really aware of reactions and how people are just engaging in certain content and engaging in certain things, and it can come up with some amazing ideas. And then sometimes you need a sounding board. I mean, it's always great to have a sounding board, and having supportive sounding boards is very important, and sometimes it will take a few tries, and it might change, and that's okay. And there might be certain subjects that you can totally try on certain people and you can't try on others. Like my mom goes to like most of my stand-up shows, and she's like the biggest supporter of me and stuff like that, and she finds certain things so funny, but she's also super honest with me and goes, yeah, I liked it better when you told it this way, you know? And it's great to get that feedback, but also get that love and support, right? Like at the same time. So find those people out there for you, for all your content. I think it's really important to have a good community or tribe or whatever you want to call it, that will be honest and loving and supportive. And it could be small and it could be mighty, or it could be large. I think it's get a little muddled. You know, it's nice to keep it small.
Yeah. Great point. Grant, anything to add to that? Anything to add to that sort of process of iteration?
I mean, I think Anastasia really hit some great things there. Like, you got to have your people. Like, we can't, most of us, we can't tell stories in isolation. And having that sounding board, like being able to sort of let go of a draft and say, like, I really need someone, I need eyes on this. I need eyes that I trust, that I respect, you know. And then also being clear with that person, what kind of feedback are you looking for? Are you just looking for general impressions? Because like when I read something, I start like proofreading it. Right. Like, is this a grammar pass? Oh, you're not looking for a grammar pass. Like a lot of people they're not concerned with that until the end, you know? And I don't want to be like nitpicking something, because I know that that's something that I can automatically go into. Right. Victoria and I have, you know, taught English before. And so that's sort of like the lens through which I see things. I'm like, do you want my perspective on your adjective choice? Because I really care about adjectives. No, oh, you don't want that. Okay, cool. So being clear with the kind of feedback that you're looking for. And you mentioned that live feedback and having that barometer question. I'd be interested to know if there's a way you can do that with the writing process. I don't know if there's a way to, I mean, I guess just maybe a scene.
Yeah.
How does this scene strike you? Oh, okay. So that way I'm not writing a whole feature or a short darker or lighter than maybe a
line or like a synopsis. Does it drive?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, because I mean, there is something just electric about a live performance setting. And I do think it's why so many actors get their start in theater and then come back to theater or stand up or improv, because that real-time feedback, it is powerful. And the co-creation, like I keep mentioning, that give and take with an audience and the storyteller, it's fleeting. It exists for a moment. It's beautiful, and then it's gone. And we love that. But sometimes I feel like writers might get a little bit precious about their scripts, their drafts. They don't want you to see it until it's right. But how are you going to know that it's right? Or are you going to know that if it's working without getting eyes on it?
Yeah. So
yeah, just letting people see your work, even if it's a work in progress, being willing to kind of open up your chest and be vulnerable, and then being clear with them about what you're looking for. So that way that vulnerability doesn't end up in excessive bruising that you weren't expecting.
Totally. In life too. Sometimes I'm just like listen, I'm telling the story and I feel this way and I really want this kind of feedback. Being clear about that. It's just like I wanna like just listen kind of feedback, or I wanna reactional feedback, or I want advice. You know, there's a different lanes, and yeah, I think it's important to do that. I love that about communicating what kind of feedback, because sometimes whoa.
Because a lot of times people are like, everybody thinks that they're like, you know, a script doctor, or they're a producer and they're gonna like fix your story. And like, maybe you're not looking for that from, you know, your brother-in-law or whatnot.
Sure.
That's fun. Absolutely. One thing I'm gonna think about actually incorporating into my process is that and Anastasia made me think of it because you talked about like making notes about what people find funny and what you find funny, and observationally. I remember I read an article about a startup founder. Can't remember the guy's name, but he sold his startup to Google for $800 million. And what he had done was that he took a notebook, walked around with the notebook, and every time he experienced a frustrating thing, he would write it down in his notebook. And eventually he goes, this is the most frustrating thing that if I build a business model around it and fix it, I'm going to make a bunch of money. And he made $800 million. Now, granted, this guy's, I'm sure, way smarter than me. I'm sure he's a genius and I'm not. But what I like about what you were saying, Anastasia, is that if I can take down, I don't write comedy predominantly, but if I can take down situations that I see or scenes that I see either in real life or in other people's stories and go, why did I feel that emotion? What were the elements of that scene that brought that emotion out in me? Then you can actually take that, interpret it in your own way, building your own projects where you're trying to elicit the same types of emotions. And then you could go show those scenes to people and be like, does this elicit the same emotion it elicited from me when I saw it in this other context? And I think that that's kind of a cool way of bringing the world into your projects and then sharing those back out to get that feedback. I like that a lot. That's pretty cool. Okay, so those are all the questions I had for you guys today. But before I let you go, please share what you're up to, where people can find you, all that stuff. Anastasia, why don't you go first? Where can people find you and follow you and find all of your stories or your stand-up or whatever?
You can follow me at Trader Joe's. No, I'm just kidding.
6 feet away.
You can follow me on Twitter at Anastasia W, on Twitter at Anastasia Wash, on Instagram. I have a YouTube channel, Anastasia TV, where I'm doing comedy songs now. It's just what I'm doing. We'll see what happens. Yeah, I promote all of my projects on there. I have a radio drama coming up based on real crimes and real hauntings. That's going to be really fun. So that's coming up. And I started a new podcast called Hysterical, where we talk about historical figures, but since we're comedians, we talk about it in an interesting way. So I'm always coming up with some weird idea. Follow me on social media and you'll figure out what I'm doing.
That's awesome. Definitely go follow Anastasia and check out all of her stuff. Super talented. Grant, what about you? What are you up to these days?
Anastasia, you pitch so well. I'm going to follow you. I'm going to dig into Hysterical. Like, cheers to you. That's great. You can find me on, I mentioned earlier, like I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and YouTube. And so I usually invest most in Instagram. That's kind of where my party's at, where the party is at for the things that I'm getting the word out about. And all of those socials are the same for me. Grant.c.Hansen, Hansen, because I'm more Danish than Swedish.
Oh.
Grant.c.Hansen. And then the company where Victoria and Josh and I make things, you can find us at all of those socials. And then again on YouTube, Screen 14 Pictures. And our social handle is at Screen 14 Pics. PICS. We're busy developing project number 3.
Nice.
Yeah. And like I mentioned before, we're excited to have started super specific, but we're excited about branching out. You know, we got our little corner of the internet and we feel like we've done that for a couple years now, over 100 episodes. And we're excited about expanding our focus, maybe shifting a little bit. So there's a little tease for any of the screeners that might catch this. Stay tuned.
Yeah, I dig it. And for all of those out there that want to write and produce their very own stories, just make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel for more conversations and videos just like this one. Do me a favor, hit the like button for me if you liked this. And again, go follow these guys because they're up to some awesome stuff. I don't talk to people who aren't awesome on my show, so go check them out. In the meantime, we'll catch you all later.